Hey everybody, welcome back. This is our third episode going into Robert Davis's book, Purpose and Form: The Necessary Basic Basis of All Ethics. Though for our third episode, we are going into chapter two, which is the myth of materialism. The first chapter or the first episode, we went over the introduction, and then the first episode, we went over the myth of the finite. And now we're heading into the myth of materialism. How are you doing today, Rob?
Pretty good. Happy to be here.
So am I. You're back in Idaho, huh?
Back in Idaho.
Excellent. It's a little cooler today. I feel like the last episode we did, it was just so hot in here. I was just sweating bullets. I was in a sauna. For some reason, the AC is not working in this room, so I got to get that fixed.
Hmm.
Luckily, overall, it's cooler.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought I'd start with a paragraph from chapter two, page 62, which kind of goes over a little bit about materialism. And then Rob, once I'm done with that, if you just want to take it over and we'll go from there.
Sure.
Okay. To begin, we must outline the materialist explanation and its elemental and necessary factors. Materialism is the basis for the assertion that human consciousness is finite and that upon death there is annihilation. If I were to argue that the infinity of existence proved existence after death, that would be uninteresting to perhaps a majority of scientific-minded individuals, because no one, at least no one we care to listen to, argues that the universe ceases to exist when we die or that it did not exist before we were born. I think that's a good place to start.
Okay. Yeah, as that's going in there, this is an introduction to this part of an argument. This whole thing is an argument. So um, you know, we're going through chapter by chapter and we can sort of branch off and talk about things that connect for us, which is why this forum's nice. But the book, it's important to notice, is a continuous argument. And so this, we're on essentially step two of the argument. Second episode we did, the first chapter, is the argument to say, actually, we need to recognize that life, or let's say existence, is infinite. Okay. And this is being approached with the view of I'm trying to talk to someone who's in the position of a nihilist, someone who, at least theoretically, has accepted most of the nihilist worldviews, most of their premises. And these first several chapters, which I call bad mythologies, the first one, the mythology of the finite, now mythology or myth of materialism, these are things that are the supporting structures to the worldview of nihilism. So this chapter is step two in taking down that whole worldview by taking down the supporting ideas, this one being materialism. And as I was saying and sort of concluded the last chapter, we've concluded that existence is infinite. We've seen that through the argument in the book. But for most people, they're like, okay, whatever, I guess that's something off over there. Doesn't apply to me. I'm still going to die. My consciousness is still just in my head and probably meaningless. So the point of this chapter is to address the source of that um, distance at which we hold the infinite. We say, okay, infinite, that's a weird idea out there. Doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in my mind and my conscious life. And so my assessment is that that point of view presumes and rests on the idea of materialism because the within the overarching view of materialism, there's the hypothesis that basically consciousness is what magically, they wouldn't say magically, but what magically springs out of the things knocking together in your head, the little molecules. Um, and so that allows people to look at their own consciousness as essentially insignificant, as this secondary byproduct thing that arises for a little while, isn't that great, and then goes away. And that's all supported through the materialist understanding, through understanding the brain as the source of consciousness, and life or human life as a finite and temporary aggregation of matter that happens for no real reason, just randomness. So this is okay, maybe we've pushed you to recognize that the infinite is something that is logically necessary. Now we need to take out the ideas of materialism that are underscoring all that. And as I've said in the book, that really, I'm not doing any work here because so many things that we've learned in the modern age really have destroyed materialism. The issue is we just haven't connected the dots. We still accept the idea of materialism because it seems to accord with our experience on this level of the world. Like, you know, there's a door, here's a book, it's materials, and things on our level just sort of bonk together and things happen. But as a fundamental view of reality and something that determines your mindset and how you engage with the world, it's it's there's so much evidence out there that shows it's nonsensical and non-workable. And this chapter is short relative to the other ones, but it's putting together those pieces and saying we got to be aware that we're done with this and actually make the commitment to move on from materialism. And we can't use it to continue to justify these sorts of claims.
How would you say that that materialism is inherently a bad idea to hold, or why do you feel like it ties so well with nihilism?
Well, it's not a bad idea in all circumstances, right? You can think of materialism as just, again, the recognition of our common view of that objects in the world exist. So, you could try to say, well, idealism is, things are just ideas. And it's like, well, when two cars crash together, there's two objects that hit together with force and causes damage, right? So that there's a reality to the materiality side of the world. The issue is when we take it as a fundamental nature, and then we start drawing conclusions based on that point of view. And this is why in the introduction, I made the case that we have to talk about metaphysics, because the problem is we've put materialism into our metaphysics, and that's an issue. We've put materialism into our basic, fundamental presuppositions and mindsets, and that's where it causes it. It's a useful approximation of how the world works on our level of abstraction and physical reality. And it's fine there, but we just need to know that it's not all the story and it's not the foundation of the story. So as we have it in our mindset now, a lot of people, again, they have that view of, well, science knows that I'm just this short-lived thing, and all the thoughts in my head, even my thinking about the fact that this is true, is just the product of chemical interaction and electrical switches going on and off in my head. And that's really the one of the key points that nihilism latches onto. And then it really undermines anything else that comes in has to go through this filter of, well, my consciousness is insignificant. So anything I feel, anything I'm sort of, you know, want to be true or wish were true, that's all just, there's no reason for it. It's just nonsense. It's just, I happen to be programmed this way and it kind of sucks, but it is what it is because it's just material nonsense that happened for no reason. And it really fuels what I think is this core of nihilism, is that view of my own consciousness is insignificant. But you're in the issue of everything you know about the world comes through your consciousness, including your belief that nihilism is true, your belief that the world's a dismal place, all like, so there's this fundamental contradiction of my consciousness is the totality of my whole life. But you also have this mantra of like, my consciousness is not important and irrelevant to the rest of the world. So it creates this disconnect that is detrimental in many ways.
And how limiting that is. I mean, to think that there's nothing beyond the existence of our reality, that, there's nothing beyond the material. We're
Mm.
just uh, a mashing up of different neural exchanges and different synapses going off, and there's nothing real outside of that. That's pretty much all we are, just chemical, just biological. Um, where do you think the idea of consciousness coming from outside rather than it just be emerging from all of those imbalances or balances?
What do I think of that idea?
Right. Because that's
Um,
something
but
that you touch on in the book, right? Is that you talk about how consciousness isn't necessarily localized.
yeah, yeah. So I think that the evidence for consciousness being solely a product of your brain is actually pretty weak. And it's only seen as strong because there is this just habitual acceptance of people saying that it's so, essentially. And and then on top of that, part of the chapter is presenting actual concrete disproof that no, your consciousness does not just come from your brain. So it's important to be able to outline and see a plausible alternative of where my consciousness is not fundamentally generated and sourced solely in the physical brain. Um, because once you can see two possible ideas, then you start to be able to um, sort different evidence. So one of the problems is people think that it's just a slam dunk that, well, we know about different parts of the brain and we know what these different parts do. And if there's damage to one part or if we do something to one part, we can depend on specific outcomes. So to them, they see that and they go, well, you can't argue around that. There's nothing to do about that. It just that clearly proves that the brain is the source of consciousness.
Mhm.
And to them, that seems like an airtight argument, but the problem is it's just not at all. The fact that the brain has particular structures that are connected to purpose and output in a consistent way. That's true, but it has nothing to do with saying whether or not consciousness is fundamentally sourced or located in the brain. It just means that consciousness depends on the brain to interact with the world in certain ways. So it's actually entirely correlation, not causation. And it only takes seeing that, you might think that's a weird point of view. You might think it has nothing going for it, but it is a plausible point of view. It's not ruled out by the facts on the table. And that alone should get you past this idea of like, oh, case closed. We know consciousness is caused by the brain. No, we don't. We know that the brain has particular functions and that the structures it has correlate to different functions, but it could just as easily be like, if you have a car engine and you damage one part of the engine, it's going to have certain negative effects. That doesn't mean gasoline comes from and only resides in car engines. Like you
Yeah.
have to put the gas in from outside, and as the gas is going through and it's turned on and running, and if there's a damage in a certain spot, there's going to be particular downstream causes connected to that spot. Yes, but you still put the gasoline in from the outside. Not a perfect metaphor, but close to what we're talking about.
I think that that makes sense. So the idea would be that the consciousness is the fuel that is then being entered into the machine or the vehicle, which is us.
Yeah. And at least in this case, specifically the brain. The brain has a particular function. It, um, you might say, directs or regulates consciousness in some way. It has a function that it is performing on and or using consciousness. But that doesn't mean that the brain generates consciousness.
Now that point is directly at odds with materialism.
Right, right. The materialist idea is again, I mean, it's just this straight line dogma of nope, consciousness comes from the brain. End of story. We know it. And I open up the chapter acknowledging that a lot of people do say that, including very smart people, very well qualified people in the right fields. The issue is a lot of people, again, smart people, qualified people in the appropriate fields also say the opposite and also say we have no idea where consciousness comes from or how it interacts. So mo most of what we run into when we have this conversation is just referring to expert testimony. It's just, well, the guy I like says so, so therefore that's how it is. And we have to get past that and we have to be able to talk about what's the explanation for what you're saying and how solid is it. And it does tend to be people on the materialist side who have the more just dogmatic, poor explanations. And again, they rest on this thing of like, well, when you damage the brain, it causes damage in consciousness, therefore consciousness comes from the brain. It's like that's really not that great of an argument. I mean, it has certain true implications, but that does not mean consciousness is caused. And it's really, it seems to just be they just can't fathom the fact, like an alternative view. It would be just too outside of their bounds to think that consciousness is not rooted in the brain.
So by coming with that approach of it being non-local, that means that essentially brains are receivers of consciousness, right? So if you were to,
Mhm.
so I'm just trying to make that connection then too, is that, in the Bible it talks about how, uh, we are the temple, essentially.
Mhm.
So is that maybe something, I wonder if that might be a connection where consciousness lies within the brain, is received by the brain, and so this would be the temple that the consciousness is dwelling within. Something along
Yeah,
that.
that's a plausible connection. I think in the chapter, I don't make a specific counterclaim to say this is specifically how consciousness works separately because I don't think we actually know. I think we can sort of guess at it and prod at a different kind of view. But the main point of the chapter and the main argument is we can know that it's not the materialist case for sure. So it has to be something beyond that. It has to be it points to consciousness being beyond, and then we can we can conjecture and we can speculate um, different mechanisms and different sketches of what that might look on a broader scale. But I mean, I don't necessarily hold to a specific, is the consciousness always located just in the head? I mean, there's a lot of new um,
So,
science, just say general science, but um, studies that show, a good amount of our consciousness, well, let's say our behavior outputs that we think of as determined by consciousness come in from, inputs from our gut, our microbiome, things that are spread out throughout our body. People get organ transplants, and whether it's the heart or the kidneys or whatever, they'll actually pick up in some cases these weird. either personality traits or even skills that the other person had. So
Yeah. Tough,
there's like this is weird.
tough,
You know,
man.
it doesn't fit with the materialist stuff, like very clearly, but it's very clearly documented and known that there's more of a distributed essence of consciousness, even within just the body. Um, so and the main point is we just got to push past this really broad-based glossing idea that the materialists have, and then the fact that they just have a ridiculous level of confidence in it that's completely unwarranted.
I would agree. I would agree on that front. It's again, it's just a limiting belief system that holds you back from seeking out any other potentials, and it's to me, life's a lot less fun that way, you know. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
those set yourself up in those parameters, that you
Mhm.
think outside the box, literally. Um, so let's think about, or let's go into this then too. Comes to mind. So if let's say brains are the receivers, that would mean that there's a certain level of consciousness that is being received by our brains and any other living creature that is also walking around with us. Does this also account for, I don't know, plants, anything else? Is there the possibility that anything that we wouldn't consider a receiver of consciousness would actually be able to display that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the possibility. Again, it sounds weird. It sounds a little beyond the pale, but it's fairly obvious that, you animals that we barely think of as, um, worthy of being called animals, bugs, basically, ants, bees, these things have very complex behaviors, very tightly regulated behaviors. And basically, there's like, oh, it's in their instincts or it's in their genes, whatever that means. It really offers no explanation whatsoever for the complexity that we see. Whether it's building bridges out of their own bodies or just crazy stuff. And they don't have a nervous system, right? So there's definitely at least the possibility that um, consciousness has a more pervasive effect that's not just connected to, especially not just connected to like the mammalian neocortex. I mean, there are really smart birds who have a very different brain um, formation than we do, and yet they solve puzzles. They can understand the physical displacement of water based on volume. Um, so yeah, I mean, and then you asked about plants. So again, we're just sort of opening the door. And so yeah, there's the possibility that plants have a some level of consciousness more than we might habitually expect if we're used to thinking of only humans and maybe a few other animals as being remotely conscious at all, and then everything else just being like little robots moving around and or inert stones. Um, but
I guess
and there are some,
that's where
okay.
sentience comes in, right? Where it's the I am, as being at least the ultimate perceived of level of consciousness that we're able to exhibit, right? Would be the I am, that level of uh, of of awareness.
Yeah, there's the self-awareness, the reflexive consciousness.
You're right, and um, that's something that I think falls in line with, let's say, artificial intelligence, where they're able to get robots and artificial intelligence to I guess regurgitate information that's been fed to it, but it doesn't have that I am. It doesn't have that consciousness, that non-localized consciousness. It's whatever it's been programmed into that system or algorithm. Um, could we touch on that a little bit too?
Yeah, yeah. So the there's an important distinction with AI that an author named Yuval Noah Harari comes up with. Well, I don't know if he came up with it, but he publicized it and did a good job for making it known. I actually take him to task quite a bit in the book for other things,
I
but
mean,
that's
he's a
something.
really, yeah, I don't mean to cut you off. Not a big fan of that guy. I mean,
No,
just
that's fine. I'm throwing him a bone. He did something really good in this case of making a distinction that most people are missing. So on the one hand, you have intelligence. On
mm,
the other hand, you have consciousness. Those are two different things. So when people envision sort of the horror stories of Terminator, whatnot, or Ultron taking over, they're imagining artificial consciousness. Artificial intelligence is a different thing because intelligence is the um, the patterned output of data. You might someone more adept might correct me on that slightly, but essentially, intelligence is a particular aspect of consciousness. It is not the same as consciousness itself. So, as we're designing AI, as you were saying, the AI is able to replicate a pattern that deals with expressing data or expressing particular, it doesn't have to be number data. It could be, they can make paintings out of input data. Um, but that's very different from there being a reflexive consciousness there that can reflect on what's being asked, reflect on what it's doing, and potentially change itself through creative conjecture, through imagination. And in philosophy, they talk about this as the problem of qualia. And what that word means,
qualia.
qualia. Mhm. So what that word is talking about is trying to get it. If you see, let's say you see the color green, there's the color green, there's the chemical stuff going on in your brain to produce the color green, and then there's the sensation or the awareness of seeing green, that qualia of seeing green.
Qualia. Okay.
And so that's referring to the fact that there's something there noticing and observing. And for the most part, if you pushed it, I think most AI people would have to admit, no, there's no qualia going on the AI side. There's a program pattern. And then part of the issue is some people just sort of dismiss the idea of qualia, and that's sort of the nihilism side, is they just say, well, there's nothing added. Like the green color in the chemical compounds and then your brain making the color green, that's the totality of everything. That includes the qualia. There's nothing added. The consciousness that you're talking about is just a subset of the chemical stuff going on versus people who have the intuition that like, no, there's something here noticing things.
Right.
Um, that so there's a disconnect between when people talk like that, and it can be hard to pass. But AI doesn't have that. AI can't creatively conjecture. It can't think about its own thinking and then rewrite it for itself like we can. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, that does perfectly. Because there's always that distinction, I feel, and I think that's a good lead in when we're talking about uh, higher levels of consciousness, let's say human beings versus lower level, and where does it then just become kind of a functionality rather than a will to do something, to act, and then going into artificial intelligence where it feels like people are concerned with that high level ability to mimic. It's like
Yeah.
there then that a certain level of information that it can attain that would then allow it to give off the idea that it was sentient, that it was actually, having
Right.
like, is there a certain
Right.
information that it would need to at least replicate that, not necessarily on its own accord, but it's
Mhm.
just there's always concerns I feel when it comes to these levels of human beings trying to recreate itself almost,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say on the end there, um, you said, is there a certain amount of information that could be input for it to sort of achieve this? And I think, um, the good thing is because we know how to put in information into the AI. That's sort of what we're going off of. The answer is that no, there's no level of input information that will achieve consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness is not the result of X amount of accumulated information. Consciousness is something else that has the ability to receive information and do things with it. So it's related to information in a way, but it's not composed inherently and entirely by information. And you can talk about AI having a will to some degree, but essentially you're talking about a programmed will. It has, it's going to interact with you in a patterned way, but that pattern is pre-programmed in, whereas we have a will that is malleable, that can respond even in the moment in a different way. Um, it's somewhat mysterious, and we don't know even how that works too well, but it's and there are, prejudices and habits and that sort of stuff, but we do have a alive and malleable will, whereas the AI has a static and pre-programmed will.
So let's say that we are the receptors of consciousness, whether that's whether that's a part of our brain, whether that's in our gut, it's maybe that receptor is non-local as well, an aspect of the receptor of the ability to receive consciousness. Do you think that the idea to perceive consciousness falls into it being like a vibration? I know people like to talk about that. Is it like the receptors that we are have to be attuned in a specific way to then be able to get a level of consciousness? Like, do you think there's a fluctuation in that? Do you think that some human beings exude more consciousness than others? Do you think that has anything to do with vibrations? Do you think that has anything to do with things that people ingest externally that they incorporate internally that it then has some sort of an issue with their ability to be that receiver?
Yeah, that's a pretty popular thought in terms of the modern world that's in some ways beyond materialism already. Um, in general, I don't like to wed myself to a particular mechanism because it is all speculation at this point. I think that in terms of external materials input, possibly, but at the same time, Jesus makes a pretty radical claim that what goes into your mouth does not defile you, and seems to draw a pretty clear line between the interior of your spirit and the consumption of your body. You could argue whether or not he was actually talking about that or not. Um, but I think there's something to be said for sort of the supremacy of the spiritual level that could override the potential inputs of the material level. Again, it's all speculation. I think in terms of
That is speculation, but there's no, I gotta have a little speculation.
yeah, no, you can't. That's part of we talk about Deutsch, his philosophy and his description of science. Like, we don't exist without speculation. So I'm not disparaging it at all. I'm not saying, oh, that's nonsense. I'm just saying I have no idea the particulars. I'm especially in this part of the book, I'm more focused on what what we can prove is not true. So we can move away from that, and then we're open up and, yes, there's all these ideas coming, and we have to have some sort of um, filter on that and some sort of preference. But um, yeah, so it's fine to be open to the ideas. I'm not saying otherwise. I just also maintain my own level of skepticism, even in that. It's like, I don't know. That's an intriguing idea, but I don't know.
It is. I mean, because then you start to think, and look at some of the things that flow in and out of specific religions as well. I think that now, something that is generally accepted would be the idea that the pineal gland plays into some effect of being able to perceive consciousness. Perhaps,
Yeah,
perhaps
sure.
it's speculation, right? But I mean, if we're looking at the fact that the myth in the title of the chapter, the myth is materialism. So once we call out the fact that materialism is a myth, which is a limiting belief system and saying that everything is localized, that you are generating your own consciousness through chemical, interactions within your brain or in other parts of the body. The rest I think kind of falls into that level of, we just don't know because there's no
Yeah.
it's hard to really be able to discern and figure out what where the reality lies even in that. There's not a whole lot of hard scientific fact.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Though there is towards the end of the chapter, you do bring some scientific facts to the table, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So that would be the last part of the chapter is sort of the definitive case closed. Here's the um, definitive disproof of the materialist point of view. And so um, we can move into that and talking about Dean Radin's work. Um,
Yeah.
but the just to reiterate the basis that we're arguing against is this idea that your consciousness is an emergent phenomena that comes from chemical interactions in your brain. What that means, that's an explanation. And what that explanation 100% entails is that your there's no way that your consciousness can reach beyond your skull directly. You have the input of your senses, you can put language out in the world and function through that. But there cannot be any such thing as your consciousness having direct effect on the world, nor any sort of ESP telepathy sort of stuff. You cannot have that because your consciousness is only chemical interaction in your brains. That's just definitive. That with the explanation that materialism gives, there is absolutely no way that you could support anything like that beyond the normal five senses interaction that we're all used to. So, with that understanding, then we move to talking about Dean Radin's work, which says actually that stuff has it has a level of reality that disproves and can't be explained by materialism. I hesitated there because if I said that stuff's real, people would jump to the end and they'd be like, "Oh, he believes in or whatever, all level of stuff," that then they would just dismiss me. But Dean Radin doesn't make a case for, ghosts flying around or people levitating or anything like that. But he does talk about the scientific experiments that have been done on um, what they call psychic phenomena. And it's not a drastic thing. Like it's not what the sort of hyperbole movie style stuff pretends that it is, but there is this noticeable, definite effect of some level of conscious interaction that exceeds the bounds that would be true if we were material bodies and consciousness was a secondary limited phenomena.
And so you've already been referencing Dean Radin's work. Who is he?
And is a researcher in a field that he calls PSI.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of a maybe the more tepid way of introducing psychic phenomena, not calling it paranormal psychology or whatever. So try to disassociate a little bit from some of the bad representations of the field. But he wrote a book called The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena. And you might have immediate reactions to that and think, oh, that's nonsense, or oh, that's you know, even evil or something like that. Um, hey, that's a prejudgment. I would encourage you to be curious, be skeptical, and check out the book. In my own book, I encourage people to check out the full work because what he's done in this book, he's been working in the field for decades, and basically he opens it up. You can tell he's kind of frustrated. He's like, "Yeah, look, I get it. There's a lot of nonsense out there. There's a lot of wacky stuff. I'm not here for that. I'm just here to tell you about." There are these experiments that have been done that come back with consistent positive results that cannot be explained by chance or fraud or any of that other stuff. And it's conclusive over so long with so many different evidences that there's a real level of psychic internet interaction that happens. And so he keeps his claims pretty mild. I mean, he tells you what the experience there, and there's some pretty incredible stuff there, but he does it very rigorously. He explores all sorts of counterclaims, possible methodological flaws, how the experiments have been designed really carefully. And part of the good thing about so many people have this reaction of like, come on, that stuff, yeah, right, that everyone pushes back against it. But these researchers for years and years and decades have been like, all right, fine, let's make the experiment even more foolproof. Let's put in even more layers of protection. So there's this one that sort of illustrates how crazy the lengths that they go to really like pad the experiment against bias. There was this experiment where essentially he was testing like ESP, telepathy, communication between minds directly. And it involved two people watching a videotape at one point. And like I think the first person watches it, and then the second person has to accurately pick the videotape out of a bunch of others. And it came back with these, after repetitions and all that sort of stuff, it came back with positive results. Like there was a level above chance, a non-negligible result of people being accurate. And one of the objections someone raised was like, well, this was back in the days of VHS. Well, because the first person watched that one VHS and not the others, then the second person watching the VHSs could have picked up on the fact that the film in the VHS had been run at least once. And so there would have been a different in the display, like display of screen color. And so they're like, all right, fine. We're going to do this experiment again. And we're going to have different copies of VHSs on both sides to make sure that there's not, the film's not being degraded as it's run once through a machine. Now, again, the idea that someone would pick up on a VHS having been played before, whatever, but maybe.
They
But they
just
play
wanted to
that
discount
too.
all right. They wanted to
Right. So
discount.
they get to these levels of where they just put in, and he goes through a ton of the examples of like how much they've put in these safeguards to make sure there's no possible um, other explanation than what they're trying to see about psi. And skeptics have really pushed them to this level of like they have they've accepted most of what skeptics have said and said, all right, let's design an experiment that would satisfy those objections. And so it gets to the point, I think you can read the quote of where finally, basically, people who are reviewing this material, professional people, professional statisticians, people hired by the US government, they look into it and they're like, this is clearly demonstrated. People have clearly shown that it's not about flaws in the experiment. It's not about fraud or whatever. This is clearly evident. And there's actually not even, they say, there's not even a point doing more experiments to prove the existence of psi because it's so clear that it's there.
And so there was actually before we get into that quotation real quick, I did have a question.
Sure.
He makes a connection to aspirin in some way, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. So he does a really good job on a lot of levels of this book of just walking people through and helping them to assess the information that they're being given in a appropriate way. So the point about aspirin is that when you take aspirin to reduce the risk of heart attack, it has been shown to have basically I'm going to pull a number out, but it's a low percent. It's like 3% positive effect, right? So aspirin gives you like 3% benefit over not aspirin for protecting your heart if you're at risk for heart attack.
Mhm.
Okay. That 3% is so clear and so consistent that it has been judged unethical to deprive people of aspirin. You cannot do an experiment where you deprive people of aspirin if you know that they would benefit from it if they have a heart condition. So it's what he's saying is even though it's only 3%, it's a very small amount. It's actually very significant. 3% of improvement on someone's life and their chances for a heart attack are so significant that you cannot deprive someone of that. So then he uses that point throughout the book to say, look, I'm not saying that people 100% of the time or even 80% of the time can have telepathic communication or something like that. He's saying there's this elevated chance. It's not random. There's some level of effect. It's clearly there, and we have to take notice of it. Not that it's this like supreme superpower that there's a psychic in the other room who knows all about your past or whatever it is. And at least in one of the effects I quote there, the way after they do the meta-analysis, after they do this experiment a ton of times, look at all the different results and take those results and analyze them as a set of experiments. That's what a meta-analysis is. They come up with the finding that there's a non-zero or a non-random chance that this is happening, and the effect size, the observed positive effect is what is, I think it's 5 times greater than the effect of aspirin. So it's like, 15% above the effects expected by just random chance. So it's
Yeah.
actually a pretty prevalent thing. It's more prevalent and more present than the positive effects of aspirin, which are considered
But
clearly effective and significant. So he has these little
people still
um,
discount this much more. People are more inclined to take an aspirin, right?
mhm, yeah. So he has these little heuristics of like how to introduce you to scientific material and get you to process it in the right way. Because if you just let off and are like, well, there's a 15% above random chance that this is happening, then people would be like, yeah, that's not much.
Right.
So just putting in a little bit of context of what other experiments experience in these kinds of expectations and results and evaluations.
Scrutiny. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay. So let's go ahead and get on that quotation here from Radin. What was it? What was okay. And in 1995, the American Institutes for Research reviewed formally classified government-sponsored research for the CIA at the request of the U.S. Congress. Statistician Jessica Utz is, I believe that's her name, Utz,
Probably UTTS.
UPS, of the University of California, Davis, one of the two principal reviewers, concluded that the statistical results of the studies examined are far beyond what is expected by chance. Arguments that these results could be due to methodological flaws in the experiments are soundly refuted. Effects of similar magnitude to these found in government-sponsored research have been replicated at a number of laboratories across the world. That's the proper pronunciation, laboratories. Such consistency cannot be readily explained by claims of flaws or fraud. It is recommended that future experiments focus on understanding how this phenomenon works and on how to make it as useful as possible. There is little benefit to continuing experiments designed to offer proof. The other principal reviewer, skeptic Ray Hyman, agreed.
Yes. So I think that bit to highlight there's this person is an outside reviewer. She's reviewing the meta-analysis. and she's reporting to the government. She's supposed to look into it and say, you know, here's what they found, here's whether it's significant or not. And she says, after looking at all this, there's little benefit, if any, about doing more experiments to prove the existence of psychic phenomena. We know that they exist, is what she's saying. And there's this guy, Ray Hyman, who is a skeptic, and he talks, Dan Radin or Dean Radin talks about him throughout the book. And essentially, he talks about different levels of skeptic. There's like the skeptic, the person who basically is just any person on the street. The basic opinion is, oh, yeah, that's all nonsense. But someone who's actually an informed skeptic, someone who's actually done the research or read through the research and done the meta-analysis and looked at all the ins and outs of the methods. And this guy, Ray Hyman, is one of them. And basically, he ends up in this position where he's looked at it so much, he says, all right, I cannot say that I can say that there's something going on here. I cannot say it's due to, you know, obvious fraud or even unobvious fraud, given the extents that they've put all these changes to the experiments in. He basically comes to a point he won't go over and say, all right, I believe psychic phenomena exist, but he has no explanation. He's just like, something's going on. I don't know what it is. I don't really believe it's psi, but he's reading the literature and he's like, I mean, all these objections have been answered. There's not a position where someone who is skeptical and open to looking at the evidence can forward any of these objections that are just sort of off the cuff. Well, someone's faking it, or they didn't do the experiment well enough, or it hasn't been replicated. All those things are just flat out not true. And so if you're a skeptic and you're actually looking at the experiments and actually looking at what's true, you can't make any of those claims. And so there's this guy, he's like, yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going on. He's not ready to say, yep, it's psychic phenomena, psi exists, but he's like, this her assessment of it is correct, right? So I think that is a good point about just because someone has the degrees of science and they express an opinion in a scientific manner. They say, well, it's probably this problem with the experiment. That doesn't mean they've actually read the experiments themselves and seen whether or not that problem was taken care of, addressed, tried to address, or they failed. You actually have to get into the details of the research itself and see if those things have been answered. And the reality is, we're in a place where most people don't know anything about it. Most people aren't going to look into it and haven't looked into it. Even scientists, even very respected scientists. And, but they're perfectly comfortable just saying, that's all nonsense. No one believes in that stuff. But then you get the people who actually look into it, they come away saying these things, like professional government reviewers are like, this is clearly a thing. These are clearly well-made experiments and have done so many variations and iterations and fixes of possible flaws. And there's no way it's being faked. It's not methodological flaws. It's not any of that. It's clearly happening. We don't understand what it is. We need to learn more about it.
Why do you think there's such a taboo against acknowledging this type of information despite the irrefutable facts?
Well, I think it ties right into the chapter is this if we accept this, I think there's a tacit understanding that this just blows our metaphysics out of the water. Like this destroys materialism irrefutably, and that's why it's in here as part of the chapter. And I think people recognize that. And because materialism has become a metaphysics for us, because it has become part of our deep mindsets and even our identity to some degree, you know, to a large degree, especially say a decade ago and the decades before that, anyone who was not a materialist, you could kind of look at it and be like, are you really scientific? Like that was the general perception of like scientists are materialists. And there's still some people who believe that, including some scientists, but it's become much less prevalent and much less acceptable to just sort of have that glossing view at this point. And so, but because there is that level of identification between science and the identity of being a scientist and the preconceptions of materialism and even down the road nihilism, the sense that if we recognize these things, we need to undergo some big changes in our basic orientation to life and to the possibility of the world. And even though you and I probably think that, well, that's a good thing because really this just opens up possibility, it's still uncomfortable to challenge your basic assumptions, and especially when your identity's mixed up in it. So I think that's where the resistance comes from, is because people know the implications just intuitively. They know that if we had to admit that this was true, it would change so many things so drastically, even if it's just a tiny little effect. Like it just is incompatible with the ideas of materialism. And so if you're going to get rid of materialism, you got to get rid of stuff that is built off of that. And that's so much of our modern world and mindset that it becomes threatening when that's threatened.
And so similar to our discussion last chapter, you know, instead of waiting for the experts to come around and finally acknowledge that these things exist, I think this information, these studies, and this way of thinking, to an extent, is just being spread around, and people are, you know, figuring this out for themselves without necessarily relying on those accredited institutions to give the green light for
Mhm.
it.
Um, so on that note, I think it'd be helpful to just talk about a few examples. Because again, there's only so much we can do. I mean, if the listener's not gonna read the book, if they're not gonna look into it more deeply, can't control that. But just for so many people who I know would be skeptical for one reason or another, or by skeptical, I mean averse to and holding this at arm's length and not wanting to believe it. You know, I think it'd be helpful to look at some examples of like, you have heard this stuff is ridiculous. You've heard it's nonsense. You've heard you're not supposed to give it any credulity. You've heard that basically, I'm just guessing, but you've probably heard that from like celebrity pop science people and news media and movies, right? That's generally how people come by this understanding. Maybe you had a really cool high school science teacher who also affirmed this point of view, or college science teacher. Um, but let's just look at a couple of the examples that we can see in modern day, and we'll start with some really non-controversial ones that show that this is really not a pattern that we can trust of just, oh, somebody said so and they know what they're talking about. Um, Number one comes from a book I really like called The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. And she has a whole chapter on how stress got a bad name in the media. And basically, I mean, I think anyone off the top of their head could think of some headlines like stress causes cancer, stress shortens your life, get rid of stress, it's killing you. That sort of stuff is just rampant out there. Um, and when you read the book, The Upside of Stress, she basically debunks all of that and says, these headlines are actually a problem. Actually, she provides evidence to say that those headlines are actively hurting people, if not shortening their lives. Um, so when you start to see stuff like that in the scientific field, you can start to sort of think, oh, and this is kind of obvious when you say it, but the headlines and the media are not reliable sources of accurate scientific information.
Yeah.
Right. So, another example I just came across, I was listening to a podcast with Stephen Meyer, and he was on Jonathan Pageau's podcast, and he was talking about the guy who was the head of a paleontology institute that was set up to honor and celebrate Darwin.
Hmm.
And I think he was in Germany. Yeah. Um, and he's like all Darwin all the time. He loves him. He thinks any alternative Darwin stuff is just nonsense. And he had this display up. This is a story coming through Stephen Meyer, but he knows the guy and knows his story, so he had a personal involvement in his change. So um, this guy is running this institute devoted to Darwin and devoted to being against the intelligent design folks. Like he's pro-evolution, anti-intelligent design. And he had this display in his studio of a set of balance scales. And on one, he had Darwin's book, The Origin of the Species. And on the other, he had all this big stack of books by the intelligent design people. And it weighted in favor of Darwin. And he was like, Darwin still wins out. Well, basically, from what Meyer was relating, someone was just like, hey, you should probably read their books if you're going to basically trash them. And he was like, all right. And then he read their books and was like, uh-oh, they have good arguments. And so I think, and so ultimately, he is actually now pro intelligent design. And even though he was like the top guy, pro Darwin, um, you know,
But all
respected.
converged right there. Yeah.
Right. He's a respected scientist. He's running in scientific circles. But I think this illustrates a really common just reality that we have to recognize is that no matter how scientific someone might be, doesn't mean that everything that they believe is rigorously tested and that they've looked into the counter evidence. And I think that's a lot more prevalent than we like to think. And it has these effects of people, like even someone who's a scientist, an academic, you would assume that they had read the counter arguments, but you can't read all the counter arguments in the world. And so people just don't. And they just assume, well, someone else did the work for me. I trust them. Therefore, I'm going to stay on their side. And they get really confident and they just eschew anyone who's saying the opposite. Like, I know you're, no, 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 that's nonsense. But there's so many cases of these, so many times when people look in to the opposite point of view, it turns out people haven't been doing their homework. They haven't been dealing with the fundamental explanations and the tests and the counterproofs. And when they end up looking at it, they go, uh-oh, I've been radically supporting this other side that I just assume had all the smart people on it. And it turns out that we haven't addressed these arguments well at all. And there's really good counter arguments. And now I need to look into it. And then things end up flipping around. So that's two examples, stress and evolution, where high level scientists in the appropriate fields are looking into the things and being like, things are very different than we're being told. And I mean, this cascades all the way down through all sorts of modern stuff that we've experiencing, but I mean, we just have to face it. We do not have a trustworthy um, vehicle of information for informed decision making, especially on issues that are disagreeable or remotely controversial.
On top of that, you just have people in general that don't want to look at all, different points of view or be open enough to
Mhm.
read, quote unquote, the opposition's point of view and come at it with at least a level of understanding that
Mhm.
maybe this person isn't, I might disagree with them, but that doesn't necessarily make them, stupid or incoherent. And
Mhm.
again, like
Right.
this book is you've been able to take a head-on approach into digesting somebody that you don't necessarily agree with idea and ideologies to better understand and refute them. In some instances,
Yeah.
do this, like I'm sure the guy that he started to read the opposition, the works that opposed Darwin's and then grew to appreciate that level of thinking and actually adopted it for himself rather than use it as fuel to go against
Right.
things that Darwin talked about. So very
Right. And then just to reiterate, the point of that is to just bring up this issue of like, I understand that people are going to be skeptical about the idea of psychic phenomena, of these supposed scientific experiments and proofs, but I mean, the reality is there are so many things that we just think we know and that we've trusted people to tell us down the line. And I think most people, especially over the last few years, have come to realize a lot of stuff like that, there's no stock in it. And it's not much better than rumor. In fact, sometimes it's worse than rumor because a rumor that is phrased in scientific language and comes from a scientist ends up being treated not as a rumor, whereas, you know, just random person telling you something, you can kind of be like, maybe. So I mean, that's the invitation to, hey, maybe you don't know what you think you know. Maybe there's information out there that would convince you otherwise. And I would suggest that this book, The Conscious Universe by Dean Radin, has that information in it. I would suggest that if you read it, you would be astounded at the level of thoroughness and detail, attention to detail that people have put into making the experiments, and the levels of success and replication that have been achieved are just astronomical. And so the idea of like, oh, that's just easily refutable. It's really not. If you'll read it for yourself, it's very clear that it's not easily refutable. And then you have to look at all those people who are just waving their hand and being like that, and you go, oh, wait a minute. Those people don't know what they're talking about. No matter how informed they seem to be, no matter how confident they are, no matter how well educated they are, and well the accolades they have in the field of science or whatever it is, they're actually not functioning on that level as a scientist of looking into the experiments and the data and the results and the preparations and the objections and all that sort of stuff. They're not doing science at that point. So um, yeah, it really is definitive. The proofs out there
what do we do? What do
are
we do with that proof? If you don't mind me asking. So if we're negating the materialistic point of view, labeling that as a myth, we take this irrefutable data, the science that's been coming out that most scientists are completely neglecting despite the glaring evidence that this exists. What can we do now? Like harboring the idea that these psi events are accurate, that consciousness is not localized, that we have the ability to perceive and um, potentially interact with extrasensory perception, right? What,
Mhm.
what can that do for us?
Well, number one, again, why it's in the book is it should un uh, unstabilize any beginnings of the negative outgrowths of materialism that we might have in our minds. Like this, again, this is the great killing blow to materialism. So a lot of that stuff is super unhelpful. It's leading to nihilism in most cases. So you should be able to get that out of there. Um, as far as what we can do for it, what it invites us to, I mean, I would say it doesn't by any means necessarily invite us to join an alien fan club or
Ah, man.
try to meditate and levitate. Like there's no reason to take this as any more than it needs to be, and it just needs to be like, okay, our consciousness is significant. Our consciousness is part of the infinite. It's an integral part of the infinite. It's there for a reason. It has a purpose, and it has a greater purpose than just what we've generally been taught to believe of this secondary, um, finite, non-consequential bias machine, essentially. Um, it can, I think, be helpful in once you get beyond the idea of your brain being the source of your thoughts, you can start to approach thoughts in a different way. And I think that can be helpful. Um, Starting to view thoughts not as something that belongs to you or necessarily reflects because you haven't made the thought. So it's not something that reflects your true inner nature just because you had a wild thought or a morbid thought or whatever it is. Thinking of thoughts more as something that has come through, been passed through your field of mental perception. And that I think is helpful because it gives you a space where you're like, I can look at that thought, notice it, and evaluate it, but I don't have to make it a part of um, my nature or think that it actually has something to do with me very much at all. And I think that's part of why I believe it's Paul who says, take every thought captive. And so that reflects this view of, and this is really the view that pretty much all ancient civilizations, including the ancient Jews and the early Christians, was that thoughts don't belong to you and you don't generate your thoughts. Um, Thoughts are something that you perceive as part of your environment through your mental organ.
Yeah. That's see now okay, now all right, Rob. Let's get into some crazy stuff here real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh I mean these conversations are just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, this isn't stuff that you typically talk about around the ice cooler at work. I don't know, maybe you do. Uh this is I mean,
Yeah, I would if people let me, but go ahead.
yeah, same here, same here. So let's take that concept of thoughts not necessarily emanating again out of you as you know you're thinking something, so you're producing this thought. It's more of an attunement to thoughts than being able to come into your perception, giving you the ability to look at it, accept it if you want, throw it away if you don't, look at it like you're just observing it as it's passing through. What then guides people through times of incredibly blissful, happy thoughts to then times of increasingly negative, judgmental, and let's say guilt-ridden thoughts? Is this maybe again some sort of a line that people are falling up and down, or do you think that it's more you know, in any single day, somebody has 50% good thoughts, 50% bad thoughts, or I know a lot of people are led into areas of depression for a period of time, but then they're able to get out of it. Um, how does that connect with attuning one's thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things to be aware of. One is that your thoughts are not, and I think this is obvious, but your thoughts are not disconnected from your body and reality. We're going to say they're not produced by it, but they're not completely disconnected at all. So you're talking about depression and whatnot. If you sit on the couch, don't have a job, and eat junk food all day, it's going to have a correlative effect on the thoughts that run through your mind. Uh, so, so I think that's important to be said. You shouldn't just think
It's not like a thought field that you're attuning to.
showing what's going through my mind. Um,
Hmm.
so it does have something to do with materiality on some level. There's a connection there, a purposeful connection. But on the other hand, uh, I think I think really one of the better ways to think about it is like almost like a parallel to a physical journey. Like just like in your own outward life, you're going to go through different locations as well as different emotional states and all that sort of stuff. Like you're going to go through um, times where you struggle with your job or struggle finding with a job, or times where you have car issues or times where you have health issues. Those are all difficult areas that you enter into and pass through. And so you can think about them metaphorically, and this is sort of biblical language of you go through a valley, right? Um, so same thing in general, you can go through valleys of the mental landscape. You can be just on that part of a journey. So I think it's just parallel in that way to our everyday lives, and that we what we should know to expect at this point is we don't have a life that's given to us or laid out in front of us of just onward and upward, straight, steady going, easy sunshine and rainbows. We go through a journey of valleys.
Yeah.
And the same is true of our mind. And sometimes they're aligned, but sometimes they're offset. You can be going great in your material life and be in the depths of the valley in your mind, or you can be in the dumps and material stuff, poor health, no job, bad prospects, all that sort of stuff. But you can be on a really strong um, mental and spiritual state. So I think just thinking of it as a journey through um, different lands and just different prospects in front of you, it's not disconnected from your control. You have significant choices to make and you have an input in it and you can do things about it, of how to handle it, which way to take, what's the best way to handle it. And that applies again outwardly in your life as well as with your mind. But it's not all up to you. You know, you have trials that are going to come your way, both
It's kind
mentally
of,
and physically.
yeah. I mean, you can have, it's hard to, let's say, be in a bad mood and harbor extremely pleasant thoughts. You can, I mean, but you feel like you're going against the grain when you do that. It's much easier to wallow in your own self-pity or whatever it is while you're in a negative mood. It's just easier to follow that train of thought. Um, do you think that by changing your train of thought to something more positive, let's say you're focusing on something, a specific outcome that is holding in your mental awareness, but you're not physically experiencing or expressing that. Let's say you're like one of the examples you posted that you just said was, you can be an extremely happy, grateful, positive glass half full mentality while living in, let's say, in poverty or a feeling of impoverishment. Again, you can have the opposite reaction. You could be in, societal standards, incredibly wealthy, incredibly well off. You could have golden toilets, but feel complete misery, not, being depressed, need to take multiple antidepressants. Does harboring a positive train of thought then help lead people outside of that physical representation of being impoverished? Does that help? Like, do you feel like there's that strong connection between thoughts and a thought process with somebody's physical reality?
It's definitely connected. I'm going to give a little bit, maybe a counterintuitive answer, but um, I think when we're thinking about these things, we can snap back into the old mindset of like I produce my thoughts, and then that leads us in the direction of oh, I'm in the dumps in one section or the other. But if I just make myself do the positive thing, then positive things will happen. And you can kind of see there, I think that there's the idea that I can make myself think the positive thing. So I don't think that it functions like that. I think that's a mistake to think of it that way. And then that hurts people because they go, why can't I can't be positive. I guess I just can't. I guess I'm not a positive person. But then you're back to thinking that your thoughts are produced by you and say something intrinsically about you. So what I think does work is going back to the metaphysics conversation, going back to your presumptions, preconceptions, and your mindsets and thinking about those. So you don't think um, everything's great, sunshine and rainbows. Let me just chant good things all the time. You you adjust your mindset so that you are in line with goodness, infinite goodness, ultimately. And that orients you to deal with the negative times in the appropriate way. So when a negative thought comes, you don't think it necessarily reflects on you, and you deal with it in a way of saying, okay, that's unpleasant, but I'm not going to allow that to lead me down a certain path because I know my path, the good path for me lies in a different direction. So when you have sort of one or more steps back from the being involved with your thoughts, then the darkness of your thoughts or the unpleasantness of your thoughts again is sort of housed in what can still be a positive mindset. So it's really about the mindset, not the mind contents, not what's passing through your mind. And you can adjust your mindset by thinking about thoughts a little bit. Um, but I don't think you do a direct thing where you input and control your thoughts and make a new stream appear. You might be an odd way to say it, but you dedicate yourself to the proper mindset, and then whatever's coming through your mind is going to be dealt with in the proper way, and that's going to have downstream effects of when you are in the dumps, you're going to deal with it much better, and you're going to still capitalize on opportunities that come by because you won't be crippled by self doubt or guilt or whatever. So you can take advantage of opportunities that come along while you're in the valley, even though when in other cases you would be sort of held back from that. And then when you're in the positive space, you'll avoid self-sabotage and whatnot. And so you can stay in those spaces longer. So there is a way to affect that, I think, to a certain extent, but it's not the sort of direct way that people jump to of like, I'm just going to repeat positive thoughts and make myself believe them. That's just not going to work, and because that's not how it works.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I just, it's just always that I've always had that kind of idea or that thought process that, there was that strong connection between what it is that you're thinking and then the ability to harness the energy within yourself to capitalize and actualize that thought process. So you can be in the dumps, you can be in let's say a pit of despair physically. Um, but if you start to harbor and don a much more positive outlook correlated with action, and that's where confidence comes in. You start
Mhm.
to actually act on things that you tell yourself you're going to do. You get better over time, and then there seems to be that shift. It's almost like a specific turning point where positive thoughts start to far outweigh negative thoughts.
Yeah, I think in most cases, I mean, I don't want to preclude the fact that you can sort of you might say a relapse, or you might get a big dump of stuff from somewhere else that you're not, hoping for. But definitely on the whole, like you can change your mental habits for sure. There are ways for myself, there are ways that I used to think that have dramatically lessened, even though they were deeply ingrained in me before. In some of them to the point of almost completely disappearing. Some of them, it's like they're there, but they really don't hold much weight with me at all. And I just sort of keep brushing them off, and they seem to get shallower and better. So I think that for sure happens. I just wouldn't be surprised again, because it's not about particularly what you're producing. You might get some trials thrown your way mentally, but that doesn't, if anything, that says you're ready for trials, so that's a different way, a different mindset allows you to look at the trial and handle it better rather than thinking, oh man, all that work I put in for a decade didn't actually pay off.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Um, Man, I kind of want to keep going on that topic, and I know that we can keep going on it for quite some time. But I think maybe that would be a good place for us to stop. And then if we have
Mhm.
any other questions regarding that, or maybe if anybody that has watched the video leaves a comment in the chat, we can go ahead and touch on that in the following episode. Um, but I do want to keep going on that just a little bit, maybe tying into the next chapter if we can.
Okay.
Um, there was an additional quote, Rob, in the book. It was on page, what was that, 39?
31, I think.
Would you like to go ahead and take this quote?
Yeah, sure. So I think hopefully this one you'll see how it resonates with what we've been talking about. This is a quote from G.K. Chesterton. The special mark of the modern world is not that it is skeptical, but that it is dogmatic without knowing it. So feel like that's a really apt one for this chapter because people pass off their skepticism as scientific, but really it's just prejudice and rumors and going off, you know, authority or, respect for degrees kind of stuff, rather than looking at the explanations. And that's something Chesterton seemed to be well aware of. I assume he wrote that over 100 years ago now. So
And I
what we're
mean,
dealing what we're
okay,
dealing with isn't new.
no, it's not new at all. It's not new at all. And it would seem that that's such a convenient bumper to rest your weary arms on when you don't want to, have the time or produce the mental energy to engage in actual dialogue with people. If you're on the side of where the quote unquote facts lie, you can just say, "Oh, but here, facts." "Oh, well,
Mhm.
I don't have to say anything. Let these facts that somebody else produced speak for me." Which I guess is good for the side that's not necessarily on uh the opinions represented by different experts, though you do know you have truth because all you have is the time and energy you've put into really knuckling down on expressing your truths. And so you don't have the experts to hide behind, you just have your ability to express truth. And the more you're able to do that, the more refined you're going to be, the better you're going to become at doing that. It's going to make you stronger in the long run. Those that have to point to experts as a means to express their opinion, once those experts fall away or they're discredited, then those people don't even have the daily trial and error of honing in on your ability to speak truth because they
Mhm.
haven't done that. So I
Yeah,
there's definite upside in that as well in being able to try to break down people's illusions that they're hiding behind dogma.
right. Usually without knowing it. And if you said that to them, they'd be like, "No, I hate dogma." And it's like, well, but just we probably talked about this in both videos so far, but just to reiterate, we're all again, if it's true that life is infinite, if it's true that consciousness is also infinite, um, then there's infinite information out there. So there's no way that any of us is going to be adequately informed in pursuing all streams of information. So it's not a it's not a detriment. It's not a we're not trying to slander people by saying, oh, they just rely on experts. Like you're always going to outsource some to someone else who's an expert in that thing. The issue comes in when conclusions start to be challenged and someone's trying to portray counter evidence, and the response is, no, 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 no. I know what I already believe because my expert told me so. Then it's like, okay, you should be looking for your experts to give you explanations. Anyways, you should be looking for the expert explanations from the experts, not just their word for it. And then if you have expert explanations, then someone offers you an explanation, you should be able to see how they line up.
Yeah,
But
that's
but
how it should be.
right, but even even then, people we're not going to do it perfectly. We're all going to have our blind spots and that sort of stuff. So it's not meant to be insulting or degrading. Like this is just the world we live in, and there's difficulty in it, and there's misunderstanding and that sort of stuff. But I think especially when you're sitting down like this and you're, if someone who's listening to this is clearly interested in ideas, dare say they're some level of intellectual, then if you're an intellectual, I think you have to hold yourself to intellectual standards when it comes to contentious issues, and especially when it comes to your level of confidence. If you want to say, that's all probably not true, honestly, I'm not going to look into it. I don't have the time. Fair enough. I think it'd be worth your time, but if you're not going to make that decision, you're just like, you haven't convinced me. Maybe there's a better argument. If you're not rude and dismissive and pushing is like, no, no, only my view is really acceptable. Yours is unsupported nonsense. That's fine. Some people are going to be like that. They're not going to, no, none of us are going to go into absolutely everything and get the right views on everything exactly sorted out, rigorously determined, all that sort of stuff. But if you're an intellectual, if you're interested in ideas, and you're interested about being right, as a lot of us are, um, and you go into a field where you haven't looked into it yourself, you're just using secondhand information, and especially if you notice that information is not in the form of explanations, it's just in authority and clout, and then you start being the more or less aggressor, and you say, no, 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 you can't believe any of that. That's not real. That's not science. And you start asserting all these things very confidently. That's when it becomes the bad kind of dogma, where you're like, you're really confident in this. You're really trying to push your position, but you really don't have a position of your own to push, and you're not looking into the counter evidence. And that's the whole point of science. So if you want to claim the mantle of science and intellectual, you got to play by the rules and you got to hold yourself to those standards.
I think that's the one of the biggest problems that we face today as a society, is that we uh don't want to debate, we don't want to speak, we don't want to, share other opinions. We don't want to share our own opinions, because um a lot of people have just sided with a specific dominant opinion on multiple things and
Mm,
completely cuts themselves off from expressing or at least even listening to ulterior points of view, different points of view. And I think that's a big problem, and it's almost at a point to where, there's terms like wrong think, and
right.
or fake news. Anything can just be called fake news. Um, we're falling away from that encouragement of sitting down with another person that might hold a different point of view, listening to what they're saying, and have an actual debate around, logic, critical thinking, understanding different points of views, and then trying to actually get to the bottom of certain things. Um, we are in an era of just complete echo chambers, not necessarily saying like, okay, I'll use YouTube for an example. So YouTube cracked down on a lot of things that you just can't talk about anymore. And people have been reprimanded, people have been demonetized, people have been shut down for holding uh, opinions that differ from a specific narrative that is just being pushed at every angle. So people are building parallel everything. If you can't express yourself properly on YouTube, you can always go to things like Rumble or what are other ones? Locals or
Minds, yeah.
pick your one. But then what that does is it brings people into echo chambers because now people are going
Yeah.
to feel encouraged about what their opinions are. So they'll go to Rumble if they hold a more of a right-leaning point of view. They'll stay on YouTube. So if you can express an opinion on Rumble in such a way that's going to be able to be heard and gotten across on YouTube so that people who aren't typically listening to opinions like yours are being exposed to them different, that might challenge their level of thinking. That's probably the best way to go because otherwise you're already speaking to people that have an understanding of yours. If those people are listening to you, they're just generally initially receptive to
Right.
what you're talking about. Um, and I think it's just going to get crazier and crazier because the algorithms and whatnot are going to fine tune the exact information that you want to hear. And so you're never going to be exposed to anything outside of that because the algorithm just wants you to click on the next video. So its desire is to put up content then that you will already agree with. It's not going to put on, a video about the, color red if your favorite color is blue. So you're
Yeah.
never you're never going to see what red's like because you've been exposed to blue the whole time.
Right.
And so I think that's a big issue too, that people, we're already seeing that play out in comedy. Everyone's just too sensitive and they're not willing to hear different points of view, and if you do express one, they need their safe space or it's just whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of growth that comes out of that way of thinking.
Right. And I think that ties back into the idea of like the sort of fear of thoughts and fear of opposing thoughts ties back into the idea that I am my thoughts and I produce my thoughts. So like if someone's sticking in
Yeah.
um, like offensive information, then it's doing something to me personally. Whereas again, this point of view that your thoughts are something separate from you, um, gives you a lot more power in all those situations. And it also, I think, ties into what I believe will come up in the next chapter, a discussion of identity and how the when we misattribute identity and link our identity in with our ideas, our thoughts, our favorite colors, and our favorite political teams and that sort of stuff, then we end up being more defensive of those than we need to be and doing a less than rational job at the defense. A less than we don't defend them fairly. We defend them unfairly because we think, hey, this is a threat to my very being, my identity, and I'll fight at all costs for that.
Have you ever heard of egregores or like pendulum?
I have heard what's his name talk about them.
So there's a thought out there, and egregores ties into this, and man, I know we just keep going, but it's
Hmm.
last things I'll bring up here because it ties in with different political opinions, this level of duality of like it's got to be this or it's got to be that. So there's the idea of egregores or pendulums that are like a bundle of energy, of thought energy around a specific thing, like of your opinion. So there's like a Republican pendulum or egregore where it has every individual's attention, intention, belief system is fed energetically into this. It's not necessarily a cognizant being, but it's an energy, an energy representational of that way of thinking. So people can be just pulled and swayed into specific ways of thinking simply by the beliefs that they have. So if let's say, you're a part of the Republican Party or you're a part of the Democrat Party, why is it that everybody just aligns with just these ways of thinking? It's like why wouldn't somebody say like, oh yeah, I'm more right leaning, but I harbor a lot of Democrat ways of thinking too. It's like, no, it's either you're agreeing with the party or you're agreeing against the party.
Hmm.
That's kind of energetically their own bubbles of, I guess whatever that would mean. So I think that it creates momentum and I guess that would be the term momentum into these belief systems that prevent people from harboring other ones so easily because they've already been energetically sucked in and feeding this energy of their original thought process, or their original opinions. that then their groups of friends, their people also harbor. So they interact with them and they solidify and they make those opinions even firm. So when somebody else comes along and says, "No, I think it's actually this," you're less apt to regard them in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's like a collective motivation that's composed of like a set of I around a set of ideas, right? Is what you're saying, and then the you get the sense once you're in there that like the all these ideas are because they're motivated by sort of the same energy that they're all necessarily go together.
Yeah.
And so if you lose one, then you are in threat of losing the whole thing.
Right. So
So
you have to push
it
out that one person that's acting that specific way, then change
mhm,
the entire belief system of that egregore or pendulum or whatever it is. It's like think of
mhm,
like I guess an extreme of that would be people in a cult.
right.
They're just like so energetically attuned by their thought energy or by their mental energy to align itself with this way of thinking. Like, think of what happens if somebody says, "You know what, I'm tired of this," they might be killed, something might actually happen to them because they're threatening that like bundled mass of energetic whatever, potential.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard then too for people to navigate around those things. And to me, that ties in a lot with people's polarized ways of thinking. And
Yeah.
they don't even realize the amount of energy. Like think about the people that, and I know that on this channel, I speak about the news quite a bit. And I just think that that's mainly because we're in a specific time where the news stories are so relevant that they may eventually affect you on a personal level. And so the more you have an awareness of that now, the better you're going to be at making decisions in the long run, to
Yeah.
navigate potentially coming. But I mean, you think about it like thinking like just doing the research on different news articles, thinking about the news, that's giving my mental energy to a specific topic on a consistent basis, And so just like if the old adage is, you are what you eat, whatever you eat if you eat a high fat diet, you're more likely to become fat. Whatever it's the same thing as I think thought process too, whatever idea, whatever belief system you're connecting with on an energetic, on a thought level, the more that's going to influence your very being. If you listen to negative music all the time, you're more apt to think in a negative way and to express negative traits. And so I think that's another thing people need to consider when they're coming up with specific belief systems and not willing to open up to new ones, potentially easier
Yeah.
ones.
I think that's why James Lindsay says um, something like the cure for cults is curiosity.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly it. Yeah, that makes sense. The cure for cults is curiosity. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Yes, sir. Got to be open-minded. Don't
Mhm.
get involved. Don't when you're on and you're in the maze of reality and the ability to harbor specific belief systems. Don't get sidetracked into a cult. Whatever you do,
Yeah.
stay curious.
Stay curious. There we go. Yep.
All right, Rob. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on? I know that you've got some other works as well.
Yeah, I'll just do a brief touch on that for those who may be getting curious at this point. I think we're on a good track here. I think the purpose informed book that we're talking about, I think, is the place to start as far as philosophy, as far as um, intellectual goes. If you're a philosophical, intellectual kind of person, start with purpose informed. That's not my first book, but it's my second full work of philosophy, and I think it's the best place to get in. My first book, Jnana Yoga, has a lot of merits to it. I am working on rewriting it. So I would say, unless you are supremely interested in the epistemological approach, which I reference a little bit in this book. So if that piques your curiosity, you can check that out. At the same time, you might want to wait for the revised version at least. Um, as far as not so much heavy intellectualism goes, The Diamond is a book of short stories that's on my website. You can find it for free. Uh, my website is jnayogaphilosophY.com. So JNANAYOGA philosophy.com. So you can find that there. I also have my most recent book is called Defund the Fun Police. That's a more of a contemporary political one. Um, and that's on my website as well. It's only available as a PDF as of now. And then I also have a bunch of blog posts on that website. So one that would be relevant to today's conversation that I think is kind of a fun read. It's much less technical than some of my stuff is called Ascribing Personality to a Mountaintop. And so that's one of those that's sort of along the panpsychist track that sort of hopefully introduces the idea of thinking about consciousness located in other things further than we normally think about. I have my political mantra on there, which I mentioned in the last conversation, which I think can be helpful for people, and some more fun ones like some Star Wars themed posts and just relaying some, I think, practical philosophy through that, but through the lens of looking at the Star Wars movies or superhero movies in general. So there's a lot of material on there to sort through and look through. But I think if people are interested, that could be a smaller step in getting in rather than going for the whole book. And there's some mix and match of more intellectual stuff and maybe some more creative writing stuff. So that's all available for those who might be interested at this point.
Yeah, we'll put a link. We'll put a link down in the description below, your email, and then also the Amazon link to get the book, Purpose and Form. Um, Man, we're gonna keep knocking these out, every
Sounds
week
good.
doing it. Next week, get ready, hold on to your pants,
I'm
because
excited for the next chapter and a bunch more to come. So,
absolutely we got chapter 3 coming in next week, and that is the myth of coming into being.
mhm.
That's going to be a real zinger or a
Yeah.
bang, as the kids say these days.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I guess it's a good place to stop. Do you have anything else to add, Rob?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, if you like this production, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Let us know what you think. If there's anything that you'd like to for us to touch on in next week episode, go ahead and leave it in the description or in the comments below. Um, Otherwise, you have yourselves a great week. God bless, and may peace be with you.